So for those of you asking, no need to place yourself on mute. You're already automatically muted once you join the conversation, so it's okay. You won't have any option to mute or unmute yourself. So if you are just joining us, please do go ahead and download the feedback app. We will consistently repost those links in the chat. So the reason why we're downloading the feedback app is so that we can give feedback for this session for the presenters as well as your moderators. So we will have a portion at the end for giving feedback, and we will demo how to use the feedback app. So in the meantime, just please do go ahead and get that set up, download the app, register, and we will demo how to use the app at the end of the session. Okay. So as mentioned, we will continue to post those links for the download. And we've also posted a link if you are unable to download the feedback app because you're using a computer. So we do have a web version as well. Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to Community Online Academy. So glad to have you all join us today. And welcome to Harnessing Your Brain Power. I'm Onye from NextJump, and I'll be moderating today's session led by Karen Pollard. So before we get started, I'd like to share a few tips to help ensure that we get the most out of this experience. This is a webinar version, so as you will notice now as participants, your videos and audio will remain off throughout the session, so there is no need to mute yourself. You will only be able to see the panelists, including myself, Karen, our speaker, and Raul, our moderator, our second moderator. You do have the option to chat, so feel free to chat any questions you have. We are here to help. We will also have a Q&A session at the end, so if you have any questions for Karen at any point in time while she is presenting, please do chat those in as well, and I will collate those throughout and queue them up for the Q&A session. We value your feedback at the end so we can continue to make our offerings better and better each week. So if you haven't done so already, please do download that feedback app, and we will go over how it works at the end of the session. But here's a brief overview of how to download it. These are the links. These are the tiny URL links. You can use these codes. You can scan these codes with your mobile device, or you can type in one of these URLs depending on your mobile device. If you are using an Apple device, go ahead and use the one for Apple, Android, likewise. You can also actually search Feedback Labs in your app store, and it will be the application with the blue icon. So after you have downloaded the app, enter your work email to register, the same email address that you use in your Perks at Work platform. If you were asked to select an organization, please select World. After that, you will go ahead and verify your account and create a password. We will also continue to share these App Store download links in the chat. And if you encounter any issues with the Feedback app, please email that email address, coahelpdesk@nexstrom.com. We will also chat these in. All right. So on to the main agenda for today. Welcome again to COA. We've been running COA now for the past 9 weeks, bringing over 100 classes for both kids and adults every Thursday with time slots from the UK to LA. Last week, we had over 30,000 attendees join us, and the numbers are growing each week. So we're so glad to have you here. I am particularly excited to introduce your presenter for today's session, Karen Pollard. Dr. Pollard earned her degree in clinical psychology from the University of LA Verne in Los Angeles, California. She then specialized in clinical neuropsychology at University of Virginia. She has worked with thousands of people to help them gain a greater understanding of how their brain works and offer them individualized suggestions for how to maximize their brain's potential. About 2 years ago, she founded Brain Power Advisors, where she uses a 3-step process to help individuals and business leaders unlock the unique processing power of their brain in order to increase efficiency and reduce stress. In this course, she will teach strategies for how to begin taking control of your brain power to improve memory and time management. In her personal life, Dr. Pollard is the married mother of 2 young daughters. She is also quite the adventurer. She was recently part of a group that raised funds to start a cervical cancer screening clinic in Tanzania. And while there, she and her team climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. Quite an ambitious feat that is definitely high ranking on my own bucket list. So without any further ado, I will now hand it over to Dr. Karen Pollard.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen with you. When I started getting into public speaking, somebody once told me that you should always start with a joke. And I don't remember too many jokes from my childhood, but I do remember one that happens to be about a frog. And this particular frog needed a loan. So he hopped into the bank and he hopped up to the teller, and the teller's name was Patty Black. And he said, "Patty, I need a loan." And Patty looked at the frog and said, "You know, we don't normally loan money to frogs. I'm going to need to see some collateral." So the frog handed Patty a little porcelain horse. And Patty said, "You know, I'm still not so sure, so I need to check with my supervisor." So she goes to the back and she's talking to her manager, and she said, "There's this frog out front. He's asking for a loan. He gave me this for collateral. I don't even know what it is. What is this?" And the manager said, "It's a knick-knack, Patty Black. Give the frog a loan." Now, I don't know how many of you genuinely laughed at that joke. Typically, when I present this in person, I get a couple of groans. So if you gave me a pity laugh or a groan, I appreciate it. I am sure most of you have heard a statistic that we only use 10% of our brain's processing power. And you've heard that statistic because there was a very famous study done decades ago that suggested that we only use 10% of our brain power. And if you're anything like me, you heard that statistic and you thought, that seems about right. I think I'm only using 10% of my brain power. But the truth is that that study has been proven over and over again to be untrue. The findings were incorrect. And the truth is that we actually use almost 100% of our brain's processing power all the time. So I started thinking, with a statistic that's that far off from the actual truth, why did we all believe it so easily? Why was it so easy to believe that we're not using that much of our brain power? And the conclusion that I've come to is that we all feel deep down like we're capable of more if we only knew how to access it. So my goal with you all here today is to help you feel a little bit more like you're taking control of your brain power and that you're operating more at that 100%. And in order to do that, when you think about brain processes, there's so many things going on. Today, we're going to pick on memory, and we're going to pick on executive functioning, and particularly time management within executive functioning. But we're going to start with memory. And I want you to think about one aspect of memory that you would like to improve. So whether you'd like to be better at remembering names, or you'd like to be better at remembering driving directions without using your GPS, maybe you just want to be better at remembering when you're standing in your shower, whether or not you've already washed your hair. Whatever it is, pick something that you want to be better at remembering. Hopefully everyone's got it. As humans, we don't make changes in anything unless there's a catalyst. Unless there's a reason to change, we kind of keep just doing the same thing. So it's important to understand why you want to improve the part of memory that you wanted to a minute ago. So you got to think about, what success are you going to get from improving that one thing? Is it that when you're walking down the street and somebody is coming towards you, you're not going to have that moment of panic where you feel like you should remember their name and it's not coming to you? Is it that you run a business, and if you're better at remembering names, then you get more clients because people do business with folks that they trust. And when you remember somebody's name, they trust you. Whatever it is, think of the success that you're going to get from being better at that one thing that you picked in the last slide. And the other part of why, though, is why are you going to use the techniques that I'm going to teach you today? Well, each of our brains is kind of like a fingerprint. We can all do the same things, but we each go about it a little bit differently. And today I'm going to teach you a little bit about how your brain works that might be different from other people who are sitting in on this webinar. So once you know how your particular brain works, you can form the strategies to meet your exact needs. But before we can do any of that, we really need to figure out how memory works. And for this, we're going to do a little exercise. So I want you to just reach and grab something near you, whether it's a pencil. If you don't have a pencil, a piece of paper, even just putting your hand on your knee could work. But just grab something that you can hold during this exercise. When we're creating a new memory, there are 4 steps, and I created a little acronym for you. Everyone can surely remember. And while we're learning these steps, whatever object you picked, whether it's your knee or a pencil, whatever, for the time being, that is information. And your hand is going to be your memory center. And we're going to figure out how to get the information to your memory center. So the first step is encoding. And when I'm in front of a live audience, I always say, everyone say encoding, because it helps you remember it when you say it out loud. But encoding is the first step. Encoding would be your first touch of this object. So if you first start to place your hand on your knee or on your pencil, when your skin is first feeling what that is encoding. When your brain first encounters information, it is encoding it. And a couple of things need to happen in order for you to encode information. The first thing is that you need to be able to see and hear it coming in order to catch it. If you know somebody who's prescribed hearing aids but doesn't always wear them, they might seem a little flaky, a little forgetful, but likely they're just not encoding information to begin with. And the other thing that you need in order to be able to encode information is the ability to focus. Because if you're not paying attention and somebody's trying to send you some information, you might not grasp it. And if you've ever met somebody who has a diagnosis of an attention deficit disorder, this is their issue. They might also seem a little flighty, a little flaky, a little forgetful, but really they're just not encoding that information to begin with. The second step is consolidation. Consolidation would be when you're first wrapping your fingers around this object. When your brain is trying to wrap its mind around what information it's trying to learn, it helps it make sense. It has to know what type of information it is in order to bring it back and do step 3, which is storage. Storage is your brain's ability to hold on to what it's learned. So if you know somebody with Alzheimer's disease, I want you to imagine that this object that they're trying to grasp has baby oil all over it. And they try to grasp it and they might get it for a second, but it slips out. They're not able to hold on to that information to do step 3, which is storage. And then step 4 is recall. And that's the ability to give back the information that you've learned. So these are the 4 steps in creating a new memory. And when we're talking about improving memory or making changes to get better at whatever that one thing is, we're talking about improving something called prospective memory. If you've not heard the term prospective memory, it means remembering to remember. So for example, if you've ever gone to the grocery list and you wrote out your list before you went, but then you get to the grocery store and you realize your list is sitting on your refrigerator, you forgot to remember to remember. Another way to think about it is Hansel and Gretel. They were going through the woods and they didn't want to get lost, so they left themselves a trail of breadcrumbs. Your brain is a giant forest of neurons. If you want to get better at remembering something, you're going to need to leave yourself some breadcrumbs that you can follow to get back to that information later. And I promise you I'm going to get to the tips, but I want to introduce these subjects first. So when we think about executive functioning and particularly time management, I want you to come up with a goal. What do you want to improve? Do you want to get more things checked off your to-do list each day? Do you want to be better at getting a jump on big projects rather than leaving them to the last minute? Think about what it is that you would like to improve in terms of time management. And again, we're going to think about what success are we going to get from making that improvement in time management. Does it mean that you're going to be more efficient and able to get more done in your day? Does it mean you're going to end up having more minutes to spend with your family and friends rather than working? What success are you hoping to get from that? Well, I'll tell you the first step in improving time management. The first step is understanding how you're currently spending your time. A lot of us take a lot of care each week to write things down in a calendar, to make a lot of plans and figure out how we're going to spend our time. But very few of us retroactively look at how our time was spent. And I tell you what, we are very poor estimators of how we spend our time. So if you think back to that exercise we did a moment ago with grasping the pen, that exercise, think about how long you think that took. Do you think it took 1 minute? Do you think it took 5 minutes? Do you think it took 30 seconds? What do you think? In reality, it took about 2 minutes. I'm not sure if your estimation was spot on or if it was a little bit off. But what I find when I am in front of live audiences is typically people are off, usually by 30 seconds to a minute or more. And if you think about everything you do in your day, if you're off by 30 seconds to a minute or more, you're really not very accurately estimating how long it takes you to do things and how you're spending your time. So going back and creating a time journal each day, looking at how your time was actually spent, not how you planned to spend it, but how you actually spent your minutes, can be very valuable, because over time, say a week, you can look at that and see where your time is going and see opportunities to improve. I often ask people whether they feel like they're a good multitasker or not. Multitasking has been a big concept for many years now, and a lot of people are very proud of their multitasking skills. But the more research that's done, the more we're learning that the brain is really not actually capable of multitasking. There's a great book by Dave Crenshaw called The Myth of Multitasking. And if you haven't read it, it's a great read, The Myth of Multitasking. And his whole point in the book is that the brain is not capable of devoting 100% attention to more than one thing. You can devote less attention to multiple things, but not 100% of your attention can go to one thing and another. Instead, when you feel like you're working on multiple things at once, what your brain is actually doing is very rapidly switching its focus between one thing and another. And Dave Crenshaw calls this switch tasking instead of multitasking. And that's actually, in my perspective, a much more accurate way to describe it. Now, switch tasking can be done and can be done effectively, but it also is a big energy and time waster for your brain. You spend a lot of time and energy switching back and forth, and it results in fatigue mentally and physically if you do it too much. So one way to kind of make this feel clear in your mind is to do a little exercise, and we won't do it together in person today, but I'll tell you what it is in case you want to do it on your own later. But the exercise is to make 3 columns on a piece of paper. Imagine that in the first column, you're going to list numbers 1 through 26. In the second column, you're going to list all of the letters of the alphabet, A to Z. And then in the third column, you're going to follow a pattern, circle, square, triangle, circle, square, triangle. But you're not going to write it column 1, column 2, column 3. You're going to go across 1A circle, 2B square, 3C triangle, and you're going to go down like that. Time yourself doing that. And go back and look at how long did it take you to switch between those 3 things. Did you make any mistakes? Sometimes people get off on one number and then the whole rest of it is wrong. You can look at those kind of things. Then do the exercise again, where you do go in order by each column. You will find that you are much faster in completing those tasks and much more accurate. So the next time you're thinking about multitasking at work, you can remember that exercise and remember how much more accurate and efficient you are when you're focused on one thing at a time. So normally when I'm in a live audience situation, I pick on somebody from the audience, but since none of you have your microphones on, I won't do that. I do want you to think back to what was that frog joke that I told in the beginning. I'm going to give you just a minute and I want you to see if you can retell it or at least think of the punchline in your mind. For those of you who are needing a little help, the punchline is, it's a knick-knack, paddywhack, give the frog a loan. Now, many of you might be surprised that you were able to remember some of it, or maybe all of it, because I didn't say in the beginning, I'm going to tell you a joke and I want you to try to remember it. I just told a joke. But I feel very confident that if I had been able to pick one of you at random to retell the joke, you would have basically been able to retell it. Why do I have that level of confidence? Because I've given this presentation many times live and called on people, and I've never had anybody not be able to basically retell the joke or at least give me the punchline. But I want you to think about why that is. Why can I have that level of confidence all the time? Why do people always remember it? It's not because it's a fantastic joke. At most, I got a pity laugh at the end. But there are a couple of factors that make it so that you remembered it. Number one, there was a visual. There's a frog up on the screen that reminds you of that frog that was up there at the very beginning. Number two, it's associated with something familiar. Many of us have heard the rhyme when we were growing up about give the dog a bone. Knick knack, paddywhack, give the dog a bone. So it sounds very familiar, has that association. And finally, there's some attempt at humor. As I mentioned, it typically doesn't get a genuine belly laugh or anything, but people kind of groan, they get, okay, it's a joke. There's some attempt at humor. So visualization, association, familiarity, and humor. These are your breadcrumbs. These are the tools that most people can use to improve their memory. So I want you to think back to what that one thing was that you wanted to be better at remembering. When you're encountered with that information, I want you to use these breadcrumbs, visualize it, associate it with something familiar, make it funny. You will remember it better. Now I want you to think back to what were the steps in creating a new memory. When I prompt that, some of you might think Okay, everyone can surely remember. The E stood for encoding, and go about it that way. If you did that, you are a contextual learner, meaning your brain remembers things when you have a context around it. You have details to connect the information together. So your brain will remember stories well. So whatever that one thing was that you wanted to be better at remembering, I do want you to make a visual and associate it, make it familiar and funny and all of those things, but also make a story out of it, because that's how your brain will remember the information best. Now, there may be some of you out there, when I gave that prompt a second ago, that didn't think of the acronym. Instead, they just started thinking encoding, consolidation, recall. There was one more. If that was you, you learn best by rote. That means that your brain does not want a bunch of extraneous details. You want information boiled down into its most salient pieces, because that is how you're going to remember it best. So when you think back to that one thing, what that one thing was that you wanted to get better at remembering, what I want you to do is make it a visual and associate it, make it funny, do all those things, but don't make a story, because that is not going to work for your brain. Instead, create an image that you can flash in front of your mind's eye repeatedly. That's how you are going to remember it best. Now, I always address names specifically because so many people tell me that they want help remembering names. And typically when I'm in front of a live audience, I say to the audience, how many of you have ever said or thought to yourself, I am bad at remembering names? And without a doubt, almost every hand goes up every time. Almost all of us feel like we're bad at remembering names. So I want to challenge you, if it's the case that almost everyone feels like they're bad at remembering names, are we really bad at it, or we may be normal at remembering names? And the answer is that we're normal at it. Our brains are not designed to remember names. Our brains are designed to remember information that has meaning. And names by themselves have no meaning. They're just a collection of sounds. They only have meaning when you associate them with a person that is meaningful to you. So step one, forgive yourself for not being great automatically at remembering names. But if you want to get better at it, there are things you can do. So number one, when you meet someone new, say their name out loud 3 times. Most of you have probably heard this advice before, and most of the people who've heard it probably don't practice it on a regular basis. I started asking people why that is. Why, if you've heard this, do you not do it? And the answer that I get is that people are afraid it's going to feel awkward, so they don't do it. Well, I guarantee it's going to feel awkward for you the first few times that you do it, because it's something new, and new things always feel awkward. But it is not going to feel awkward for the other person. They're going to have one of 3 reactions. Number one, they're not going to notice that you're doing it. They're going to be so involved in what they're talking about, they're not even going to notice. Number 2, they're going to be complimented. Wow, you took the time to try to remember my name. That's awesome. And they're going to feel a stronger connection to you. Number 3, they're going to think, oh my gosh, this person's already remembered my name and I've already forgotten theirs. And they're going to be so upset that they're not remembering your name. Again, wrapped up in their own mind and not worried about what you're doing. So I promise it is not going to be awkward for the other person. Number 2, make it a priority. My dad's a great example of this, because he was like most of us, and for most of his life, he kind of said, you know what, I'm just not very good at remembering names. And then when he turned about 50, he decided, maybe I don't have to be bad at remembering names. Maybe I just need to make it important. So from then on, when he met people, his top priority in that first conversation was to remember their name. And of course, he also talked to them about other things, but he made sure to remember the name. And to this day, people tell me that he's the best person they've ever met at remembering names. And all he did was make it a priority. He didn't take a memory class. He didn't use any crazy techniques. All he did was decide it was important to him. And the last thing is try. I cannot tell you how many people tell me, you know, I'm just never been very good at names, so I think I'm never going to be very good at names. So, you know, that's just how it is. And I think to myself, wow, what a great example of complacency. Of course, if you never try, you're never going to get better. But if you do try, I promise you, wherever you feel like you're starting on the range of how awesome you could be at remembering names, you will get better. All you have to do is try. So when we're thinking about time management, I think a lot of people are thinking about productivity and how can we maximize time management to improve productivity. So I thought I would also give you my top 3 tips for maximizing productivity. Number 1 is visualize. And what I mean by this is when you wake up in the morning, before you even get out of bed, visualize the most important thing that you have to do that day. Visualize yourself working on it. Think about how you're going to start that project before you even get out of bed. Then when you get out of bed, it's going to be in the back of your mind processing. Your brain is going to be thinking about it while you're brushing your teeth, while you're getting ready for the day, while you're driving to work, whatever you're doing, your brain will be thinking about it. And when you sit down to do that task, you will be more efficient at it because your brain has already started in its mind. Number 2, be flexible. So we often make to-do lists, which I think are fantastic. I think that it's great to write down what you need to do. It's helpful to stay organized. It saves minutes. But sometimes it's not the most efficient thing to do to try to complete an entire task before you move on to the next one. If you find yourself hitting a plateau and you're just not making progress on something, switch to another task that's also important, but maybe not your top priority. Allow yourself to go back and forth between 3 or 4 high priority tasks in a single time block if you need to. If you keep being productive on a task and you can finish it, great. You don't have to switch, but allow yourself to have that freedom to be flexible if you need it, because pushing through during a plateau doesn't always produce the best work. And then finally, this is my favorite one, and it is email triage. And I cannot tell you how much time people have saved in their day by implementing this technique. I had one guy tell me he saved an hour and a half every day by doing this. So maybe not everyone's going to get those results, but it will help. We are, most of us, bombarded with emails all day. And if you're in the workforce, there has developed this expectation that you're checking your email and responding all day. But the majority of the emails that we get are not emergencies that we would have to respond to right then. So what I tell people, but people feel like, well, I can't only set 2 times a day to check my email because then I'm going to miss so many. And there are things that are going to come up that I have to respond to within an hour or 30 minutes. I can't wait 4 hours before I respond to that. So therefore I have to constantly check my email. And what that does is it takes them away from being able to devote 100% focus to what they need to be working on. So what I tell these people is you do set 2 times in your day. Maybe 3, beginning, middle, end of the day, depending on your workflow, 2 to 3 times a day, no more than 3, that you're going to respond to non-urgent emails. Then you're going to think about what is the maximum length of time between when an urgent email comes in and when I respond to it. So whether that would be a half an hour, 15 minutes for some people, half an hour, 2 hours, depending on your work, it might be a different length of time. But what is the longest amount of time that can pass before I respond to an urgent email that would be acceptable? Whatever that time frame is, at that interval during the day, you are going to pull up your email, scan it for urgent emails. If there is an urgent email, you're going to respond to it. If all of the emails are not urgent, you're going to put it away. You will respond to those during your designated time. So you're checking it so that you don't miss any emails that really do need to be responded to at that time. But you're not spending time looking at non-urgent emails when you need to be focused on other things. It's a little bit of a new practice for some people, and so it might take some getting used to. I also recommend if this is something you're going to try to implement and your people that you work with, either coworkers or your superiors, are used to you responding immediately to everything, that you have a conversation with them and let them know you're going to be implementing this technique so that they're not surprised when they don't get an immediate response to a non-urgent email. I've also had some people say that it's helpful to put a return message. So when people send you an email, it says, you know, if this is not urgent, I will reply to it in, you know, an hour, or I reply at noon today, or something like that. But that way people know what you're doing and that you are still paying attention to them while you make that shift. My hope is that now that you've listened to this and you've thought about how you can take control of some of how your brain is using its energy, that you're feeling a little closer to using 100% of your brain's processing power versus only 10%. I would love to connect with any of you on LinkedIn that would like to connect with me. If any of you have a business and you want a confidential conversation about how, you know, how you can use your time better or your employees can maximize their functioning, please feel free to give me a call. I also love doing talks. So if you have an organization that needs a speaker, feel free to reach out to me. And I believe we have some time left for Q&A.
Yes, we do. So as mentioned, continue to post in any questions that you have in the chat, and I will bubble those up to Karen. Thank you so much, Karen. That was a wonderful presentation. So one question that did come in during the session was just more tips on how to improve recollection and memory.
Improve recollection and memory. I guess I would ask the follow-up question, is it people trying to improve memory for events that happened a long time ago or more recently? For more newer information, I would say that you use those breadcrumbs that we talked about. So if you're trying to recall to-do lists, or, you know, you're walking from your desk to another office, and while you're going, 6 people stop you and tell you things you need to do when you get back to your desk. If it's trying to remember those types of things, use those breadcrumbs, make it visual, associate it, all of that. If it's memories from the past, that's a little bit of a different beast, because those memories are stored differently in your brain, and it's more about, it's just a totally different process. You can't really use these types of tools to access those memories.
Thank you so much. Another question was, do you find that some people make all emails urgent when they find out that you're checking your inbox no more than 3 times a day for non-urgent emails?
Oh, probably, but you are in control of which emails you deem urgent. So somebody might mark it as urgent, but you can tell based on the content or the subject line that, okay, this is an email that can wait for a couple of hours, even though the other person feels it's urgent. So you are in control of what's urgent and what's not the person who is sending it to you.
Okay, thank you. Could you talk more about those people who can do 7-like math in their heads or have photographic memories?
Sure. So having a photographic memory is actually very, very rare. There are some studies that suggest that less than 1% of people have that. And it's typically children. Most of the time, adults have outgrown their ability to have a photographic memory. It's just kind of an anomaly in the brain world. It's not usual, and there's really nothing you can do to get that if you weren't born with it. It just kind of happens or it doesn't. The best thing you can do is work hard to implement the types of techniques that I taught today. The more that you use them, the more natural they become, and you start doing it more automatically.
Awesome. So another question is in regards to helping college students who struggle with staying on task during, class assignments, homework, etc.
So first thing, definitely have a list written out of the things you want to accomplish. If the issue is that you get distracted, so I'm working on my studying, but then I go over here and check Facebook real quick, and then all of a sudden I'm washing dishes and I never went back to finish my studies. What you can do is set an alarm at certain intervals. So every 15 minutes, the alarm goes off, and it's your reminder to check and make sure you're doing what you had intended, or, have you gone off and started doing 6 other things? If you've done 6 other things, no judgment. This isn't a punishment situation. Just use that as your reminder to oh, okay, I need to refocus back on where I intended.
Awesome. So there's some questions in regards to retaining memory of specific types of data, like numbers, song lyrics. So how can they improve that? They find that they're struggling with retaining dates, numbers, birthdays, as well as the lyrics of songs.
So memory for numbers can be done in the same way as using the same types of techniques. You kind of create an association between numbers 0 through 9, what they look like, you visualize them. If you've seen, there was a Netflix series about the brain recently, and they talked about people who could remember, huge number strings, and they were all using these techniques. They were visualizing the numbers, they were putting them in, or maybe they were letter strings, whatever it was. They had a visual association for it. So they were using those techniques. But song lyrics and things like that are different. And a lot of people ask me, why can they remember song lyrics when they can't remember anything else? And so the opposite is true as well. Instead, they're stored slightly differently in the brain. It's stored more like a procedural memory. Procedural memory would be something like riding a bike. So your body kind of muscle memory knows how to do it. Singing a song, remembering song lyrics is kind of the same thing. It's stored like a procedure in your brain, so you don't have to consciously think about it quite as much.
Thank you. So I see a few questions about retaining childhood memories and why they could possibly be struggling with that.
There's a lot of reasons why people might not remember some things from childhood. Certainly if there was a trauma associated with the memory, there can be some blocking out of the memory moving forward into adulthood. Sometimes the memories just, we just start focusing on other things. And a lot of people use an analogy of like you have a bucket of water, and like at some point the bucket fills up and some of the water is spilling out because there's too much in there. I don't know how anatomically accurate that really is, that your brain only has a certain capacity and things spill out. But I do think we tend to focus on certain things more than others. And memories that are more emotionally charged, typically we remember better, unless it's like a trauma, like I mentioned earlier.
Thank you. So I see a question about how to fight against brain fuzz. So having so much on your mind that it's so difficult to retain anything.
Yes. So there are a lot of things that can impact your ability to think clearly. So this could be depression, anxiety, pain, fatigue, lots of things. If any of that is going on, your brain will feel fuzzy, like there's too much to do. And so the solution, not across the board, because there's a range of causes for those symptoms, but one of the best solutions is to practice relaxation and stress reduction. So taking some time, even if you're sitting at your desk and you're feeling really fuzzy, taking 2 minutes to just do some deep breathing can help clear your mind quite a bit. But on the other end of the spectrum, if you can be a person who meditates 30 minutes every morning, that would probably help clear your mind. Not all of us can get there, but even if you can just take 2 minutes to deep breathe and help your body relax, you will find that your mind is a little clearer.
Awesome. So I see quite a few questions about meditation as well. So that definitely does answer your question. Meditation does improve your ability to concentrate and focus. Yes. I see other questions also about other resources to explore. Do you have any tips in terms of books to explore, as well as some questions about supplements, if they do actually assist with retaining memory?
So as far as books, I mentioned Dave Crenshaw, Myth of Multitasking. Another good one is Nir Eyal, and that's Nireyal is the author, and his book is Indistractable. Those are great books. In terms of supplements, my position on supplements is that some people find benefit from certain supplements. And for those people, if their doctor knows that they're taking it and it's not hurting their wallet too much, then I encourage them, if you feel like you're getting a benefit, sure, go ahead and keep taking it. I don't recommend any supplements particularly. And the reason for that is I have yet to read any compelling research that is done by an independent agency that tells me that a certain supplement is the way to go. Most of the research done on supplements are done by the companies that have developed them. And so I think there's potential for bias. So I don't particularly recommend any supplements, but again, if something's helping you and you can afford it and your doctor okays it, go for it.
Awesome, thank you. One of the authors that she mentioned, Nair, actually came and spoke last week. So we do have that recording online for your resource. So definitely feel free to utilize that at any point in time. I see some questions regarding to retaining memory of dreams. So people struggle with remembering, what they dreamt about, and could you talk to, why that is?
Dreams are a funny thing. A lot of people have tried to figure out how to remember dreams and how to interpret dreams. And I don't know that there's any consensus in the literature really on dream analysis. And as far as remembering them, the only advice I can give, because I think a lot of it is outside of our control, is that if you wake up and you remember something right then and you want to remember it the next day, have a journal by your bed that you make a note about. Because if you go back to sleep, sometimes you can forget what you were thinking about in that moment. And I'll also say that technique can also be helpful if you're a person who has a lot of thoughts when you're trying to fall asleep and it's tough to get to sleep because you're thinking about all the things you're going to do the next day. If you write them down in a journal next to your bed, even if you wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it, write it down. Something about getting it on paper releases your brain from having to try to remember it, and that energy is saved, and then you can go to sleep easier.
Awesome, that's actually super helpful. And I see a few questions about any thoughts in regards to the brain post procedures like chemo. There are quite a few people that are post-treatment who would just like to know a little bit more about how to improve their brain function.
Absolutely. So one of my other specialties actually is chemo brain. And so chemo brain, first of all, it is a thing. There's a lot of people that try to question, even in the medical community, whether it's actually a condition or not. But if, statistics show that up to 80% of breast cancer survivors complain of symptoms of chemo brain, I don't think 80% of people are wrong. I think we, as a medical community, just haven't figured out exactly how it works. But the most common things that happen with chemo brain are slowed processing speed and trouble with executive functioning. So problem solving. You might have some trouble remembering things too. That's probably more related to encoding. Your brain is just having trouble filtering distractions and everything in order to remember things. So the best things that you can do for chemo brain are, one, allow yourself extra time when you're doing things, because your brain just is going to take longer to do it. Number two, you might have to improve your organization. And by that, I mean, you might have to write down a lot more what you were intending to do, where you are in a project. You might have to write a lot more down than you used to. But basically, you're looking at trying to get around those issues that chemo brain posed, because for some people, chemo brain symptoms go away after a little while, and some people, they persist. So while they're there, you need to figure out how to work around them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karen. I really do appreciate you speaking to us and answering all of these questions. But unfortunately, that's all the time that we do have for the Q&A session. However, feel free to, reach out to